All right, welcome back to the Man Enough podcast. I want to go to there's something in your book you said. You were talking about clothing and just how backwards all of this is. And you had mentioned that men actually invented high heels. Mm-hmm. And I see you wearing, I don't know if those are platforms, but I was very curious how that happened. But then also, like, if you know how it changed.
Yeah, it's such a fun story. So heels actually emerged in the 10th century in Persia. And heels are invented because of stirrups, like riding a horse. The heel makes sense to actually be in the stirrup to get a more secure footing. And then heels enter Europe in the 17th century with male aristocracy. So in the 17th, 18th century in France, red heels are the sign of like extreme masculinity and like bourgeois masculinity. And in fact, women get mocked for wearing heels in the 17th century because it's associated with male aristocracy. So women began to actually wear articles of clothing that are associated with men and are getting ridiculed. Sounds about right when we think about history. And what happens is in the late 18th and early 19th century, clothing becomes to be extremely gendered in this binary way. So things that we now associate with femininity, like makeup, jewelry, adornment, wigs, leggings, heels, that only becomes gendered as feminine in the late 18th and early 19th century as part of a political project of making up the gender binary. So I'd like to explain that for people. Here's the truth. Men and women, actually 99.9% of our genes are the same, everyone. Spoiler alert. And actually, the predominant idea in Europe prior to the Enlightenment was that there was one sex. And this binary sex model actually only emerges in the late 18th and 19th century. How do you prove a new formulation? Fashion becomes politicized. Fashion becomes how you prove that there's an inherent distinction. Why did they feel the need to say that there's an inherent distinction between men and women? After the French Revolution, you have this idea of inalienable rights. So you have French women saying, hey, so if you're saying inalienable rights, like that means women get rights, right? And then men say, about that. Actually, no.
About that.
You are biologically different and inferior, so you have to stay at home. So how do you justify patriarchy? You say naturally males and females are different, and females' natural orientation is to only be mothers at home, and males' natural orientation is to be leaders in the political sphere. And so fashion becomes politicized, where women get beaten for trying to wear pants. So if you read early feminist writing in the 19th century, the Dress Reform Society, the Rational Dress Society, the Dress Reform Movement, they're saying we want the right to wear pants, and that's not just about an article of clothing, it's about being able to exist in public, because at this time, public women were sex workers. People couldn't imagine women existing in the public without men, right? So when I'm talking about degender fashion, people are like, this new millennial internet fad. I'm like, oh my gosh, the real fad is gendering fashion to begin with.
All the podcasts we've done, you know, when the true sign of learning is when you just, wow. It takes you a minute to process. Like, okay, wait, I gotta take that in. That was deep. I'm wondering, for those that are not sure how they morally feel about the whole this discussion, religiously feel about this discussion, that are good people, that are either misinformed, shallow, whatever we may call them. But I still need them to see and treat the world fair and not be ridiculed. So what I hear you say, I hear like stages. Me and Liz talk about this stuff about, you know, we're not going to get from here to here overnight. So there's got to be something, which I think you graciously do. I guess where I'm leaning is for those of us who are, you know, it's just a lot to take in. It shouldn't be, but it is. There's got to be a way that we are changing things so that you're not living in fear. I don't want to live in fear. I don't want you to live in fear, regardless if I support or not. And I don't mean me personally. I say
right.
I for on behalf of many. You know, so how do you think we get through this? Because I have to know, as a black person, I know I don't care if you see me as equal or not. I'm done with that.
Right.
But I deserve the same rights that you have.
Right.
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 So there's two discussions there.
I really resonate with what you're saying because the focus has been on comprehension, not compassion. So people will say, I don't understand. Why do you need to understand me in order to say that I shouldn't be experiencing violence? Like that equation we need to really interrogate. Like, what lack of empathy is there in that statement to be like, I just don't get it? What I don't get it becomes a shield for saying, I'm okay with you being exposed to violence. So we need to name that bluff out loud. It's never been about comprehension. It's been about compassion. Because here's the thing. You suddenly have the time to learn the things that you prioritize. But when it comes to gender nonconforming people, I don't really have the time. That takes too much time. You don't have the compassion. Let's be honest about it. It's like when people get upset, they say there's so many new words that are being created around gender and sexuality. Why weren't you taking a more public stance on the Oxford comma? You didn't care about grammar then. You only care grammar when it comes about they, them pronouns. That's actually your shield that you're not actually naming. I'm uncomfortable with ceding ground. That's what this is about. I'm uncomfortable because I feel like I have a monopoly in culture. And if anyone else who looks different than me or thinks different than me belongs, then it's a zero-sum thinking. That means I must go. But what I want to offer the world is that there's enough space for all of us. You're operating in a fishbowl, but this is a world and this is a universe. And in fact, in my universe, when you step into your power, that just encourages me to step in mine. And that's not a conflict. So the ways that trans rights gets positioned is if it's seen as an antagonistic force against tradition, against culture. That mentality, break out of it. Actually, trans rights accelerate freedom for all people.
Yeah, that's right.
And trans rights fundamentally actually are going to help men. Because men are going to actually be able to develop their own understandings of what manhood means to them.
How does the trans and gender nonconforming movement help men specifically?
Yeah. You know, a lot of non-binary people get a bad rep because people think that we're just the killjoys coming in being like, you're not allowed to be a man or a woman. Or like, if you're a man or a woman, then you're complicit in my oppression. That's not true. What we're saying is that man and woman are two of potentially infinite. And that man and woman are like two stars in the sky. And that they don't actually require diminishing one another's shine. Man doesn't have to be not woman. Woman doesn't have to be not man. Masculine doesn't have to be not feminine. Feminine doesn't have to be not masculine. And so we're saying that there's potentially as many ways to be a man as there are men. And there's as many ways to be a woman as there are women. And you get to tell me what man and woman means to you. So actually moving beyond the gender binary is not about erasing your ability to be a man or woman. It's about asking you, who are you? And that's what's going to help men, is because we've created such a rigid and stringent straitjacket of what it means to be a man that is so malnourished, ahistorical, toxic, and dangerous for all parties involved. And what I'm actually trying to say is you don't have to be that. You get to be your own man. And that manhood doesn't invalidate anyone else's manhood. Just tell me. It's a conversation. It's a story. It's humanity. That's where category culture kills us. We only know each other through these simple words that we're all saying, but we don't even know what they mean anymore. And I want us to actually be honest. Many of us don't know who we are outside of what we've been told we should be. Trans people, we know who we are. And that's where we're being hunted, because we literally chose authenticity in the face of adversity. What rational decision in my life? Hey, everyone, I'm going to walk outside with a beard and a dress today. And people think that we just like, we're up to like some malicious intent. Darling, I have to deal with people throwing trash at me, right? For existing in public. I have to deal with extreme scrutiny of my life everywhere I go. Why am I doing this? I'm doing this because I know the power of authenticity. And that's what trans people teach men, cis men, is there's nothing more powerful than stepping into your truth. And that's what the healing is going to take in this world, is if we stop living someone else's fantasy of who we should be and we actually get intimate with who we actually are.